I wanna try and take in all the highs, embrace them for more than a moment's time. I want you, please don't move when I push you away. I know I contradict myself some days, but will you ride the lows with me?
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I am your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Our goal is to help discussions about mental health be a regular part of your daily life, no different than discussions about physical health. Mental illness can be a topic of discussion under the umbrella of mental health, along with so many other topics. This show is the original program on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Our network of shows are played in over 180 countries and cover more topics under that umbrella than you can possibly imagine. We were talking about mental health long before it became cool and popular to talk about, and thank goodness it has become so popular. We have incredible guests, advocates, patients, experts, people. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy our intro music, a song named Lows, written by Aubrey Toon. You can find her music at www.aubreytoone.com.
That night when I started praying, I cried, will you ride the lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me? When I'm down, my vision gets blurry.
Hey, listeners, I've got a great show with a great guest. He has his own podcast on the network, NeuroFM. Jeremy Rochford. Hello, welcome again.
Hello, and thanks for having me again. I'm so glad. I love talking to you, so thanks for having me.
So, Jeremy, you are infectiously positive, which is so good for someone like me who has to really work hard on that.
Well, we're a good balance together. That's why these episodes work. So thank you.
Yes, exactly. And I want to touch on a delicate subject that I have noticed as I'm entering into a different phase of my journey with autism, because as listeners may or may not know, I did not get diagnosed until I turned 54, and that's this year. So we're talking very recent diagnosis of autism. And so I did a few shows about it. And I had been kind of warned by people in the community, hey, the autism community can be a little rough if you don't say everything the exact perfect way that some people believe you should talk about autism, then you're going to get slammed. And I have gotten slammed. It's not like I'm not used to this because I've been on the air for 11 years. So I've been slammed in many other areas of mental health. But this one feels very personal because this is about my personal journey with this. And I don't appreciate being slammed on my personal journey with autism. So I thought, let's do a show about this to kind of talk about it, because it's actually hard on many people. I've spoken to many women, especially that have a late diagnosis. They've been told to be quiet their whole lives. You're too much. You're too everything to do with autism. And then they go in, they get a diagnosis, or they do a self-diagnosis and they gingerly venture into this world of autism, and then they get slammed. So that's why I'm bringing this up, so that maybe we can all be a little nicer. What do you think about that, Jeremy?
No, I absolutely love the irony of we beg and we claw and we strive for inclusion. And then as soon as someone comes into our community who doesn't think or act like us, we all of a sudden tell them how wrong they are.
Yeah.
It's one of the greatest ironies. And no, I fully agree with you. And I feel like it goes to a deeper topic of, and I hate to say this, but you and I are a little bit older and we remember the whole catchphrase, can't we all just get along?
Right.
Right.
Good old Rodney King. Yes.
Right. So for all those who still say, let me get my Rolodex or what have you, you got a floppy disk. All right, let's get this saved. Like, so for those of you who remember, great, but those of you who don't, if we're really seeking for inclusion and equality, that doesn't mean just because the way you think, everyone else has to think the way you think. This is a diagnosed spectrum, and we all accept that, which then begs the question when it comes to terminology, why do we all of a sudden stop accepting that? And I've had conversations with this or about this with a lot of individuals when the DSM-5 came along, and they terminologized, sure. They declassified, however, but they stopped using the Asperger's quantification.
Right.
And they made everyone ASD. Well, there are a lot of people I've spoken with who would rather be associated with a syndrome than a disorder.
Right.
And why would we take that right away from them? It's their diagnosis.
Right. And when you get a diagnosis like this, at least for me, it's got such a huge impact on my life. It's upended everything in the best way, I will say. But I am going to remember with clarity what was said, how I was told I was diagnosed, what I was told the diagnosis was, all of these things. And I'm going to remember that with, a wonderful feeling of warmth and love and all this stuff. And so somebody 10 years from now saying, well, you should have been told that you were blah, 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 and how dare you use that hashtag or that word or whatever, I think, is that really a necessary conversation to have?
Well, and I would take it a step further, and I'll fully admit that my bias comes from the weight loss industry, because that's where I spent a lot of my years.
Right.
When I would work with individuals to get in shape, a lot of them would come with the baggage of considering themselves ugly, which is painful because there's a lot of beautiful people out there who just don't believe it.
Right.
And what we had to work on through the weight loss process was normalizing the reality that beauty looks different for everyone.
Right.
Like, I love my wife and she loves me. And I guarantee you, if I walk down the street, there's 20 people who would look at me and go, who would ever want to marry that dude? And I'm okay with that because I'm not their cup of tea.
Right.
I am my wife's cup of tea and she's mine. And I feel like the definition of beauty being so subjective and literally in the eye of the beholder is very similar to how you quantify your autism. If you want to call yourself an Aspie, and if that gives you the greatest esteem with your diagnosis, then that's your right because it's your diagnosis. If you want to call yourself an HFA, highly functioning autistic, great. Because if that's what makes you better with yourself, it's not offending anyone. And if someone says that's offensive, I would genuinely question that, because it's not like we're getting criticized for hate mongering.
Right.
We're just simply accepting a part of our diagnosis that at some point has already been universally accepted.
Right. Exactly. And we'll learn, I was told I'm high functioning, and I would have been called a high functioning autistic person. And then I learned after, and that's not the diagnosis. I got autism 1, but I was told that, but I understand why it was explained to me in the way that it was. And it was not to say, oh, you're better off or you're less better off or what. It was just, that was just to sort of help me understand. And then I said that out loud a few times and I realized, that doesn't sound very great. Like when I first created the Autism Podcast Network and I had a picture of a superhero, like pulling open their shirt and there's an S on it. And I thought, that doesn't really land well now that I'm a part of this community too. So.
Oh, absolutely. And like, let's not forget, and that's the great thing about you and I being a little bit older. We did dumb things as kids.
Yeah. And they weren't on film, thank God.
Right? Right. But like, think about that. Like, if you're listening to this, you're an adult to some degree, which means you've probably done something stupid when you were younger.
Or said the wrong thing at the wrong
Right.
time to the wrong person. It was just wrong. Yeah.
And so if we look at our diagnosis process the same way, like you're in your infancy of your diagnosis, I'm probably in the toddler years of my diagnosis. Like, we're going to say things that are absolutely true to us now that 18 months from now, after we learn, probably shouldn't do that. Like,
Right.
here's some insider secrets. The original name for the podcast was the NDAF podcast, because girl, we NDAF. And like, that was fun for 3 months. And then when we actually got to realizing how much of a family show we are and how much we really work with adults, it's like, I don't know if that's the best way to quantify what we do. And so we dropped that. Now it's just the inside joke between my wife and I and a few other people. But there was a time where, the AC/DC logo with the ND on one side and the AF on the other was going to be the calling card. And now it's like, we look at that, we're like, that was a bad idea. Someone should have stopped. Like, to the point where we're like, hold on, we were sober and we thought that was a good idea. Wow.
I know. And the levels of shame that get like lauded out, which is why it was really important for me to do this. I don't want to shame the shamers, because believe me, I have gone that road before, and it doesn't make you feel good if you're a highly empathetic person. You think about it later. Well, wait a minute. I just turned around and did to that person what they were doing to me that I didn't like. How is that helping move any needle anywhere?
Well, it's like the old adage of bullying, right? Like, the best way to treat a bully is to bully them. You're like, I don't know if like, two wrongs don't make a right. I don't know.
Right.
But
Exactly.
right. But like, you're absolutely right. The goal of this podcast, from my perspective, is to say, all of us, let's just calm down a second and ask ourselves, are we really handling the things in the most inclusive and beneficial ways? And I feel like if you can take a step back, again, kind of going to my example, like, I know that the NDAF podcast would exclude a lot of people who I help on a daily basis.
Right.
So it was like, okay, thought about it. There's a better idea. Like, I joke about it, but not once did I feel the guilt or the shame, or did anyone guilt or shame me. And I love that you bring that up, because we're not trying to out-shame people.
Right.
We're simply trying to say that when you walk into a Cold Stone Creamery, there's more than one or two flavors.
Right.
Like, you could have any combination you want. You're still walking out with some delicious frozen confection. And as long as you're not chucking it at strangers, no harm, no foul.
Right. Exactly.
And if we can all agree with that for ice cream, then why can't we come to the same conclusion with the terminology of our own personal diagnosis?
And I'll say where people start from. I mean, I started my podcast 11 years ago, and I was told at that time, don't you dare call it anything to do with mental health. And then when I created the network, I was told by famous people, okay, we're talking famous people, even outside of mental health, famous people telling me, don't call it Mental Health News Radio Network. Are you kidding? I thought that they meant, it's just too long, because it is too long of a name, but or that's what it is. So that's what it is. But no, it wasn't anything to do with the fact that the name takes 7 hours to write out as a domain. Nothing to do with that. It had to do with the fact that I used the term mental health. No one will listen. Why would you associate with it? It just, and I don't say that to shame those people at all. I say, this is what happens. We change as a society, we evolve, hopefully. I mean, no one wants to watch Archie Bunker anymore, right? Because that's offensive. But did I grow up watching it in my home? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Did we know what he was and that was an actor and he was purposely, that this show was actually trying to tell us something about racism and stuff? Yeah, we knew that, but a lot of people didn't and took it verbatim. We're changing and evolving at such a fast clip that something I say today, next week could be like, can you believe she said that? Because none of us can keep up, and and the worst thing you can do to someone, especially when we're talking about mental health, is go for the shame.
Yeah. Especially with something as personal as a diagnosis. Like, and I don't know what your process was, and we've talked about it, but I don't know how much your listeners know. Like, I look at getting a mental health, any type of diagnosis, whether it's autism, ADHD, anything that requires you to make the cognitive step to go, you know what? I see the signs. I just want to know for sure. To me, that takes a lot of courage.
Yeah.
Almost in the same way, not to take you back to your middle school and high school, but kind of like when you're asking people out to prom. Like, do you remember how much you feared rejection of asking someone out and the guilt and shame if they said no? But all the courage it took to actually ask someone. Like, to me, it's the same way. You finally build up the courage to explore a diagnosis, and you finally get this diagnosis that makes so much of your life make sense. And then on the other side of that, you're welcomed with ridicule for using the wrong name, as if you knew it's like, I didn't even know the club had rules. I'm sorry. Like, I thought you all were welcoming me to the club, and instead you're telling me to take my shoes off because we don't wear my house slippers. I didn't even know we had house slippers. What?
And it's so bizarre that sometimes this is coming from people. I mean, usually it's anonymous. So it's somebody saying something and it's not challenging. I mean, believe me, I have had people send me some very challenging questions regarding material that I've talked about on a show. And those are great. It's coming from a therapist or from a survivor, and we're having a private discussion about what was said and what I could think about differently, and all of that is fantastic. But it's the anonymous haters,
Yes.
then tell you amongst their anonymized hate raids that they're a counselor and they find you offensive. So not only is it I'm going to shame you, I'm also going to add that I'm a professional. And as a professional talking to you with this platform, how dare you? You should not speak until you know everything and say it in the right way. Somehow when you become a corporation or you have a platform, you're suddenly not human anymore. And you should just know better. And you know what? I don't. I'm learning like everybody else.
Well, I feel like you hit on a really good point and I get in trouble with my wife about this, but here we go. It's fun. And it's similar to the advice we give and receive, right? Like, this isn't discounting professionals. So please do not take this as discounting professionals.
Absolutely not.
But it's the conversation of, do you want to hear about going to war from someone who's actually been to war, or from someone who's studied war?
Right.
Like, the person who actually went overseas and did a tour of duty is going to know a lot more about the intricacies of going to war than the person who simply just studied it. And again, this isn't criticizing anyone in the mental health field, but for someone who is a professional to approach that from such a potentially igniting and damning way is fascinating, because of all the people who know better, it should be those individuals.
I know. And what's interesting is, I mean, I have such longtime listeners of the show that, they came and attacked and did I won't say, there were a couple that I had to say, hey, will you take that comment down? Because that was like too much.
Yeah.
In response to people's comments. So it's not just fanning flames to one individual speaking on a show. You're also angering anyone else that reads that. And you're telling anyone else reading it, oh, okay, I'm so glad I listened to the show, but now I actually had someone say, I'm really glad I listened to this one show that you did. But then I read some of the comments. Actually, it was one comment. And I decided not to comment because I just didn't want to also be attacked. That is the opposite of what we're trying to do here. That is the opposite of what we're trying to do here.
And I feel like, and you kind of hit the nail on the head for me to me, there is nothing better than healthy dialogue. Not to go back to the Jeremy's getting old and yelling at cloud phase of his life, but I feel like one of the things we've lost as a society is the ability to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Like, I feel one of the things I like about you and I is we've built up such a rapport because I have so much respect for you that you could say just about anything. And I would go, even if I didn't agree with it, I go, well, okay, then I now know that that's how you feel.
Right.
And then I'll talk to you again next week. But we've gotten to this place in society where if you don't think, act, and feel the way I feel, then you're wrong and you're the enemy. And I feel like that's an extreme that we've gotten to that we've got to start pushing back against and saying, your opinion is great. Have your opinion. And if I don't agree with it, I can still value you as a human.
Agreed. I mean, think about, some of the shows that I've done. You talk about getting backlash. I mean, I have done shows with some of the Bill Cosby survivors. I have done shows with people who were in the Boston Marathon that were injured in the bombing. And people were attacking them while they were in the hospital being treated, saying that wasn't a real thing. It was a whole conspiracy thing. So it's not like we here at where I work with this network, it's not like I haven't had to even have law enforcement say, well, some of those threats actually we're going to take seriously and we're going to do an investigation during some of those times. So I've been there, done that, heard horrible things about myself, what have you. It just went. So I say all of that to preface this with, been through it, slogged through it. I was not expecting the level of it to come from something that said, oh, you're part of our community now. Welcome.
Yeah.
Since I have dealt with this before, I'm a pro at it. It's cool. The only reason I'm doing a show about it is because so many other people are getting this too. It's bigger than just a couple of not great comments because a lot of people are experiencing this, and this has got to stop. It's got to stop. I don't know how that's going to happen. Maybe, shows like this will help, but it isn't helping anyone.
So I'm gonna put on my autistic hat, which gets me in trouble sometimes, but also gets me pretty far as well. So my special interest is problem solving. And so I do want to take it a step further of, I don't know how. I do have some suggestions of how I feel we can turn the tides on this. And I'd love your opinion as well.
Yeah.
I think step one is you have to genuinely, and this is the same advice I give when I'm working with youth about bullying, of you have to ask yourself, is this true and is this helpful?
Right.
And so if someone's coming at you and they're like, you can't use the word Asperger's or Asperger's, depending on your dialect, you can't use it. Well, is this true? Well, no, it's not true. You can use it if you want to. So then let's go to the next part. Is it helpful? Well, if you're just looking for something to identify as, that's up to you. But if it actually helps you to identify as an Asperger's, then that reality to you is more important than a keyboard warrior's opinion about something they don't know. Because if they're only talking to you online and not having a genuine conversation, they don't really care about you. And I hate to put that so crassly.
Right.
Because if they genuinely cared about you, then they'd reach out and say, hey, can we have a little conversation about this? There's some things you may not know. They do it behind the scenes because they don't want to embarrass you. And they also would do it behind the scenes because they don't want to embarrass anyone else who could be reading that. Like you said,
Right.
people have commented, and that's turned off community interaction, which is completely opposite of what we're trying to do here in terms of building an inclusive community. So I think one of the first steps is ask yourself, is it true and is it helpful? And then the second thing, very similar to the bullying conversation of, if they're telling you what's wrong with you, but they're not helping you change it, how valuable is that statement?
Right.
Now, if someone who comes alongside of you and says like, hey, to these individuals and these groups of people, this terminology is offensive. If you continue to use it, you may run the risk of offending them. If that's okay with you, cool. If you didn't know, now you know. Like, that's a much different conversation than someone going, you probably shouldn't use the word high functioning autistic because that makes you look bad.
Right.
Because that doesn't help anyone, because they don't know why they look bad. They don't even know the whole context.
Exactly.
So I feel like A, ask yourself, is this true? Is this helpful? B, ask yourself, is the person saying this trying to educate me, or are they just, I don't want to say hate bombing me, but are they just opinion bombing me? That's probably a better way to put that.
Right.
Are they just opinion bombing me? And if I don't agree with their opinion, it's not helpful, then you just kind of move on. And then 3, they could always just email us and we'll just lavishly tell them how awesome they are.
Right. I mean, there's a thing for private or privacy for sending and acknowledging who you are. So if you're a counselor and something was said that you feel like is going to be difficult for other people that might hear it, send an email and identify who you are, what your counseling or coaching practice is, and explain why in that email we might need to take a different look at what we're saying. That's a wonderfully professional way to handle a differing opinion.
100%. And I know from my perspective, I've already gotten a few emails from counselors. Most of them have been great feedback, thanking us for doing what we do. But there have been 1 or 2 who are like, you may want to consider this. And it's led to great conversations, because there are things I genuinely don't know.
Right. Exactly.
But I've lived it. So I do know it. I just don't know the terminology. And this is something that's followed me my entire life. And it's almost like my entire life I taught myself to play music, and then I actually learned the notes.
Right.
So like when I did the weight loss thing and I lost 200 pounds and I would talk to therapists about it, they'd be like, oh, so you just overcame the victimization triad. I'm like, sure. I just didn't want to blame other people for me eating at 12 o'clock. Like, like they're like, oh, well, you overcame that. And I'm like, well, that's great. I just was tired of being fat, and it made me very sad, and I didn't want to not wear clothes anymore. Like, and so same with the autism realm. Like, I'm doing things, I'm creating behavioral models, I'm referring to things I've experienced, and therapists are like, oh, hey, did you know there's something very close to that? And I'm like, no, I didn't. I just lived it. Thanks for telling me.
Right.
But to just kind of go on and slam people for the sake of making yourself feel better, I think that's I think that's honestly where you and I are drawing the line today.
Yeah, it is. It is where I'm drawing the line, because it doesn't help anybody. And it's not just the host and the guest that you're trying to get at with your, self-appointed wise, whatever. It's also anyone else that reads that information and it tells them, oh, right, this is the kind of reception I'm going to get. I better just keep quiet. No, don't keep quiet. Keep talking. How many people I've interviewed that say everything, quote unquote, wrong in terms of mental health. I don't correct them. This is their journey. This is what they're talking about. And when they figured out, that I had someone on that have been many people on that deal with suicidal ideation. I am someone that has dealt with that too in my life. And so the verbiage that they were using was kind of from the 90s around suicide awareness. It was not very friendly. And it wouldn't have even occurred to me to, quote unquote, correct them on a show. They, through speaking with me privately later, just having an ally to talk about this, they've kind of picked up on the language I use, which I'm not saying that mine is the best language either, but it was just a little bit further down the road than this person. And I've noticed them starting to adopt that language, figuring out, as we do in society, like the puppy that cries too much and all the other puppies jump on him. Hey, that's, well, we're not puppies. We don't need to jump on each other to teach each other how to behave like a good little puppy. We can be kind and nice about it, and people are going to grow as they grow. I can't even fathom telling them. Now, if it's super offensive and racist and whatever, yeah, it just doesn't go on the air. But I just can't even fathom telling someone, hey, you should think about blah, blah, blah in an arresting way, because you don't really learn things positively that way,
Yeah. I mean, and it's probably just because I grew up with music being such an important part of my life. Like, I have yet to find any musician who didn't start off playing covers. And once you learn how to play Wonderwall and you can understand a GDC and how it's all wrapped together, then you start playing your own music, but you start off by playing covers. To me, it's kind of the same way. You get thrust into this world via a diagnosis, and you're just saying the things based on those around you. And then as you develop your own style, then you get to make the music that becomes the soundtrack of your life. But in the same way, we wouldn't give people a hard time for learning other people's songs as they're trying to grow their musical ability. Same way with this. Obviously, like you said, we wouldn't, if someone's being racist or very bigoted, then yes.
You name it. Yeah.
Right. But then if you really take a step back, how many of these conversations are based around that extreme? I've yet to honestly have a conversation where someone, air quotations, needed corrected. Because what I want to first do is I want to love them as a human, which means I get curious. I want to know, well, how did you come to this? How did you adopt this terminology? What makes you feel this is the best for you? And 9 times out of 10, it's because, well, this book I read uses it, or this podcast I listens to does it this way. And then that's where you get to have the conversation of, well, cool. Well, is that working for you? And if the answer is yes, then great. If the answer is no, then it's, well, what would work for you? And again, I've not met someone who's been blatantly offensive with it.
Right.
Even with the individuals that I work with who do identify as high functioning autistics, they call themselves HFAs. And I wasn't even aware of the term. I thought we were talking about home loans. I was like, HFAs? What are we talking about here? But like, that's what makes them feel esteemed. And they're like, we're HFAs. I'm like, well, great. That's fantastic for you. And having a son who is AS2, a little lower down the spectrum, I'm not offended by that. Do those people have attributes that my son will probably never have? Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe. But also, he's my son and I love my son. He's AS2. Right. Great for him. And so I'm not offended by where they're at on the spectrum. And I would imagine they're not offended where my son's at on the spectrum. So I think it all just comes down to is it working for you? Is it helpful? And is it offensive? Those are the 3 questions I think you need to ask yourself.
Absolutely. And for those listening that have felt a bit of a sting when they've ventured into the world of autism, us late diagnosed folks, come here. We don't do that here, or at least if we do, we aren't meaning to hurt anyone's feelings. It's, again, we're saying what is meaningful to us at the time. But, there are places like I have watched on an anonymous, I don't even know if I should say what it is, but it's an anonymous place you can go and post questions anonymously. And there's tons of categories that you can post in. And I'll tell you, the one for autism in women is they are rock stars. Like anyone that goes in there and tries to shame or do the correction thing or do, whatever, those women moderators are on it like you cannot believe. And they do it in such an intelligent way. It's just, the woman that just wrote this has been shamed her whole life, and she comes to this group to not be shamed. And yet here you are shaming. So we're wondering what's going on with you that you would come into this group knowing this because you had to say yes to reading the rules. Doesn't mean they read them, but
right. It's like whenever you accept the Apple terms and conditions, you don't actually read them, but carry
There's
on.
1,200 pages of rules. I didn't read it. I just went, I accept. Can I go do the thing I wanted to do on my phone? Yeah.
Just give me my GPS app and let's move on.
Exactly. I've watched the artistry, and it's artistry in which these women will jump to the defense in a nice way, but also there are boundaries around this thread, and you either delete what you just wrote or you're going to be banned. This is a respect zone here. I thought, well, that's awesome. So there are places out there where you're, you may be asked to look at things differently based on some of the things that you're saying, but you're not going to be shamed for, where you're at this moment in time with your own personal journey with autism.
Well, I feel like that's this is the cute way I tend to look at it, because part of the coaching I do is to help people with their creative endeavors, and a lot of them are wanting to find their tribe, and I find this to be no different. Like when you do the math on it, again, you and I similar age, it's beautiful. The whole thing from our day when something was amazing was that's 1 in a million. That's amazing. Right? But like when you do the math of that with the amount of billions of people there are, that means that there are 7,700 other people just like us. But think about that mathematically. If you are struggling to find a place where you belong, statistically, if you believe that, then there's 7,700 people who are just like you, who think like you, who act like you, who get you, who totally understand you. I don't know about you. I only need like 2 or 3 friends. I got 7,700 to choose from. That's amazing.
Right.
Right. It's just my task to go find them.
Right.
And I say that because, you may go to a few threads, you may go to a few places, to a few online communities and go, this is just not my jam. Right. And you know what? That's okay. Keep searching. You will find that. Like we've had that from our standpoint because we are obnoxiously cheerful. Like we've been given good counsel that we should probably dial back our obnoxious cheerfulness in the autism realm.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And it's like, but this is who we are. Like I'm not going to diminish my light so you feel better about yours. My light over here doesn't offend your light. And so we've actually tried to do our own thing of trying to find other like-minded people who are, very excited because life finally makes sense. And the interesting thing is, the more we lean into our obnoxious cheerfulness, the more other people kind of keep raising their hand and go, oh, I'm glad you feel that way. We feel that way too, but couldn't find other people.
Right.
And so to those who are struggling to find their home, it's there. And if you're not finding it at 1 or 2 places, don't stop looking.
Right.
I think we've done a good job of letting them know that they're going to always fit in with us.
Right. Exactly.
So worst case scenario, you got 2.
Exactly. I mean, I was never the popular girl anywhere. And even though I own a company and it seems like it's to some people a big thing, and to other people it's like, oh, your little podcast network, because everything's relative, right? I mean, I have had agents in Hollywood that were trying to get me to do something that go, oh yeah, that chick with that little podcast network, while I'm on the phone. And I'm like, okay, this is Hollywood, got it. But
Right.
it's like you can take things on the chin. But what's interesting is, here's a little nugget for anyone listening. When you find these things out about yourself, and then you speak to another person that has the same diagnosis, of course, it's a spectrum, so there will be differences, but and all the masking you've done, in your life, which means camouflaging who you really are so that you fit better into society. And I put air quotes around the word better. You then start to learn about, unmasking, and how much less stress you can have in your life when you can, kind of unmask. And then you go and you have a conversation with someone like you, Jeremy, where we can just fire off of each other because same age, around the same age, later diagnosis. We both have dealt with weight stuff. I mean, all these things that make us have a really great connection means I'm gonna naturally unmask around you, and how glorious it feels. Absolutely glorious. And that's going to show up on the air, right?
You're making me blush. It's a good thing this isn't a video podcast, but thank you.
And then have somebody come in and go all over what you just said while you were totally vulnerable and unmasked is not very nice. So the only thing I've asked of people is think about that. Just think before you type.
I think that's just great wisdom across the board, no matter what you're doing. Just think
Exactly.
before you do it.
I don't even leave nasty reviews when someone has really been awful, unless it's, I don't even do it then either, because I don't want to call attention to myself. Or, how you can go look and see all the reviews that somebody has left anywhere.
Yep.
I'll go do that on somebody that's really hateful at once in a blue moon and go, oh my gosh, this is all they do. Their brain, and I go to immediately mental health mode. Their brain is stuck in a neural pathway loop of negativity, and how much happier they'll be in life if they can get with a great counselor or listen to some great things to help them go pivot, because it's awful to live in that space. I know, because I have lived there.
True story. I'm gonna come back in with I have to go to problem solving mode. So for those who resonated with the last 3 minutes of this, this really helped me in my weight loss journey. It's also helped me parent my kids better. So I know it's solid advice. I call it the 3x3 rule. And it makes you think about what you're going to do. So anytime you're about to do anything, ask yourself, will you regret this 3 minutes later, 3 hours later, or 3 days later? And if the answer is yes to any of those, then you probably shouldn't do it.
Right.
And so, like yelling at my kids. Do my kids get dysregulated, which then get me dysregulated? Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
But if I yell at them, I will feel terrible 3 minutes later. I will feel terrible 3 hours later. And depending on how much collateral damage, I will feel bad 3 days later.
And maybe even 30 years later. Okay.
Right? Well, that's the joke my wife and I always have is like, let's just not be the reason they go to therapy. They're going to end up there anyways. Let's just not be the reason. But to that, right? Like same with food. Like I'm getting older. My metabolism is slowing down. And who doesn't love a good dessert bar? But if I overdo it, like 3 minutes later, I'll feel great. But 3 hours later, I'll feel like the weight of the world is just crashing on me. And so it helps keep me in check for the physical fitness side of things. And then likewise with writing reviews, like there's been some, again, me yelling at clouds, like there are some customer service situations that have deteriorated over the past 5 years that I'm like, I really just want to rip them a new one.
Right.
But that's not going to help them, because if I leave a scathing review or if I don't tip as well as I ought to, what are they going to take away from it? That I'm a curmudgeon.
Right.
So I handle it in the proper channels. So I feel like the 3X rule, 3x3, thinking about things in advance. Like, I'm about to do this. Let's do the 3X check. Will I regret this 3 minutes later? Will I regret this 3 hours later? Will I regret this 3 days later? And if the answer is yes to one or more of the three, you ought not do it.
Excellent advice to close the show on. And the great thing about working in the mental health field is that we can say, oh, everything that we just said that you could do. I won't say should, because I don't like to should on people, and I don't like people shoulding on me. But what you could do is stop and breathe and think before you bang out that stuff online. That just makes the whole world sing and hum a lot better. There's so much vitriol out there. My goodness, you don't need to add to it.
True story.
You just don't. It doesn't, especially when we're talking about your mental health. And that all of us, I admit it freely, I have been a shamer of shamers. I'm going to say I've deleted every negative review I've ever put up. I think I have, anyway, that I found. I'm not a big reviewer of things anyway, but I will take it down and just, go to that business owner directly if necessary and say, this is my experience, blah, blah, blah. Because being a business owner, I know what it's like to put all of your blood, sweat, and tears into something, and then some anonymous person leaving a horrible thing, that feels like a personal attack because of the way it's written can, really mess with your mental health. And a good response is not, oh, you tough it out. You should just, you're a corporation. You should know how to handle that. You should know better. Anything that starts with a should. Yeah. That's a time to rethink. So
I agree. That's some great wisdom. I am smarter because you exist. So thank you for that.
Ditto. And next week I'll say something awful somewhere else because of an unknown thing that I haven't figured out yet. And my loving friends and listeners will go, oh yeah, she said that. Okay, well, I hope she gets it one day. And thank you for that. Thank you for holding out hope that I will get it one day because I will.
Well, life is about balance. You have gotten so much right. I don't even know. The fact that people are going to listen to this is a testament to the great things you do. So thank you for all that you do.
Oh gosh, thank you too. I'm excited to do this. Listeners, please tune in to Jeremy's show. It is so good. It's called NeuroFM. It's not the other one that had AF in it.
Yes, we're much more responsible now. We've grown up. If you want to know more, you can go to neurofm.com. It'll take you right to the Apple. You can find it on Spreaker. You can find all the good places.
Yeah, all the good places, all the awesome places. And it's mental health plus comedy plus entrepreneurship, because those are all the things that you do, Jeremy. So that is how your show is designated, and it fits there in my humble opinion. It fits in all those places because that's you. That's what you're doing. That's what you're putting out in the world.
Well, I appreciate that. It's what I'm trying, and I'm glad that you see that. So I will take that affirmation. And like I said, continue to blush because I appreciate it.
All right, listeners, enough ranting from us today about this topic. Tune in for whatever we may rant or maybe just talk about for the next one. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next show.
But will you ride the low, low, lows with me? Will you ride the low, low, lows with me?
One thing you can always count on at Mental Health News Radio Network and my show is that there will always be dogs around. Why? They are natural healers, excellent for your mental health. The original therapy dog Miles has something to say in just a moment. For now, please check out all of our amazing shows at mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com and all your favorite podcast apps. Until next time, I'm Kristin Sananta Walker, and thank you for listening.
And I can write the low, low, lows with me. I can write the low, low, lows with me. Till my vision clears up perfectly. I can write the low, low, lows with me.
Good boy.